Okay, so along those lines, maybe you can use this opportunity to put to rest any like rumors of or misconceptions about how the streets are prioritized in terms of clearing of snow.
Great. Let me talk about that for a minute because
Okay.
it's a fairly straightforward process, and it's very straightforward if people will look at maps that are on the website as an example. Des Moines essentially is divided into really three categories: arterial streets, residential streets, and then I will call them some other high priority streets like around hospitals or fire stations or schools. Arterial streets, the major streets that carry the most traffic and are necessary for police and fire to move around, take the highest priority. As long as it's snowing, we're going to be on the arterial streets, keeping them clear. Snow in Iowa is a little bit different than it is in some areas of the country. It can last over days and really be a small amount of snow that just accumulates over 2 or 3 days as it keeps on snowing. As long as it keeps on snowing, we're going to keep the arterial streets open. They're our highest priority. After the snow stops and we've cleared the arterial streets, then we'll hit the residential streets. And with the parking restrictions we've talked about, we think that we can do them much quicker. But on those days where school is in session and in all situations, there are always some special priority streets like around hospitals, like around fire stations, and like around schools that we will treat like they're an arterial street. But most of the folks in Des Moines live on residential streets, as do you and I probably. And in those situations, we're going to get those streets after the snow is stopped and after the arterial streets have been done. The theory is that the arterial streets are absolutely necessary to be able to move public safety, and you and I should live no more than 6 or 7 blocks from one of those arterial streets. So if we can struggle to find an arterial street, arterial street will carry us from our neighborhood at least to where we need to go to either go to work or carry on with some kind of business. The arterial streets, like the arterial system in our circulatory system, is absolutely essential to keep it up and going, and so we can never lose that. That's always going to have the highest priority.
Okay. I had another question. Do you ever see heroes in Des Moines when you're out and about? I mean, I know people sometimes look at you as heroes,
Well, I'm
but do
certainly
you?
not hero
Oh,
material. I'm certainly not hero material.
okay.
I'm just a public figure that gets to talk with folks. I do. I mean, the
Mhm.
real heroes in Des Moines, in my view, are neighborhood leaders, people who work hard for their community and do it not on a public paycheck or not to be in front of a camera, but helping your neighborhood to be viable. And in snow and ice conditions, as an example, using your snowblower to take care of elderly or someone who's unable or somebody who just hasn't gotten around to it in your neighborhood. Those are real acts of heroism in my view. In my view, also, particularly in emergency circumstances, I think of some of the folks that I've seen in Birdland and Central Place, where we've had horrible flooding in my career. I think of folks helping one another, helping their families, helping their neighbors. I mean, those are real heroes. And whether it's public works or police and fire, I mean, we're people who are in the profession to provide a public service and to react well, hopefully in emergency circumstances. But at the end of the day, government can only do so much, in my view. People and their ability to help one another and to help themselves are always going to be the first line of defense, in my view, to really taking what's a horrible situation into a far worse situation. And in Des Moines, we've got a lot of people who are very gracious in helping their neighborhoods and their communities. A lot of great church and synagogue groups, mosque groups, religious groups here in Des Moines that help one another out. They're just absolutely vital. And obviously, people like Red Cross are extremely important in helping in emergency circumstances. But the real heroes to me aren't people who win the ball game with a 3-point shot or win the Super Bowl with an interception, or are necessarily somebody who's able to be in Iraq and drag their friends to safety. Those folks certainly are heroes, but on the day-to-day basis, what really adds up and really protects our communities are each and every one of our obligations to support not only ourselves but the community. And I see great examples of that really on a regular basis here in Des Moines.
Oh, that must be wonderful. Let's see. I'm gonna go back to some general. Oh, actually, I wanted to ask you if you had any previews to share on the upcoming summer stormwater season? That's anything that we should look forward to?
Well, in reality, there are a lot of folks who are far more expert in talking about climate change and changes in the weather pattern than me, but it seems pretty clear based on our experiences that we're going to continue to be probably in a wet cycle. And when we're not in a wet cycle, we'd probably be in a very dry cycle. The average kind of precipitation that we would like to see is less and less likely. We're going to be operating in extremes. And even though we spend a lot of time talking about extreme high flow or high rain events, droughts are horrible things too. And we haven't had really horrible drought in central Iowa for several years now. But I think we can expect that we're going to see that, and it gets back to good water management. Pushing water off quickly in high flow events is obviously very difficult because there are people downstream that are receiving it. But if we're in a drought event, learning how to be better stewards and keeping water on our land and for our own use is going to be pretty important. But as we look at long-term forecasts, it seems pretty clear there's going to be extremes. This winter has been terrific so far. It feels more like fall than winter. But reality is that we know the winter will break, and when it breaks, there'll be some pretty serious snowfalls. Clearly, driving carefully and taking care of your neighbors are going to be pretty important. But as we look at what will happen in spring and summer, obviously there are going to be exceptions to this, but I think what we're going to see is pretty extreme, either very dry or very wet, not the kind of average precipitation that's necessary to sustain our agricultural economy, and with that come particular problems. So we're going to have to learn to manage in the extremes more in central Iowa than we have in the past.
Are there any job openings at the Department of Public Works? Because I'm wondering, is the city on a hiring freeze?
And if Mr. Clark were here, the city manager, or a member of the city council were here, they'd say we're not on a hiring freeze. In reality, in my business, when we're in the non-construction season, the winter season, we're not hiring. But in the springtime, we hire a number of 7-month folks for the construction season, and particularly people should keep a look at an eye on the City of Des Moines webpage and the applications. There'll be soliciting applications probably in February and March for what we call 7-month positions or seasonal positions. Having a commercial driver's license is very helpful. If you don't have one, I'd suggest talking with the Iowa Department of Transportation and their offices here in central Iowa about what the requirements are to get that, but pretty important. We hire a number of people. 40 or 50 is the usual number that comes to mind for temporary positions for the construction season. And from that, sometimes an opportunity to go from part-time to full-time year-round jobs. But right now, the off-season, that is the non-construction season, we do very little hiring in my department in the winter season.
Okay, so for the employees that are lucky enough to be in that department already, I was wondering, is there cross-training among the different divisions, like based on season, like forestry, and then winter snow cleanup?
Great question. There's certainly, in something that's an emergency response that really is an all-hands kind of thing, like flood control or like major snow and ice control, major winter storms. We have people, whether they normally cut trees or whether they normally use a backhoe to tear up streets to repair pipe beneath it, they all come together in emergency operations. They're certainly cross-trained in emergency operations in snow and ice control and in flooding. On a day-to-day basis, we don't do a lot of movement between divisions at the craftsperson level. That is, if you're a truck driver, or if you're an equipment operator, or if you're a carpenter, you don't move around a great deal between divisions. At the management level, they're more likely to do that. But we recognize that particularly in emergency operations, there's an integrated whole, and are getting better at cross-training than we were a few years ago. We're a heavily unionized environment, so there's a tendency at the craft level in particular not to want to be involuntarily moved around. Less hesitancy at the management level to do that and the supervisory level. But I think there's a larger look now among all of us to do more cross-training, and we'll continue to do more of that.
Oh, okay.